Glenn's happily married like I am. You've been married. I've been married. You've had a few mistakes. I've had only one shot at it. Well, if you're as successful at marriage as you are at television shows, you got a lot coming up, haven't you? Before taking his last breath, Don Rickles, Hollywood's king of roast comedy, left behind unpublished diary pages. In them, he didn't just write about his career, family, or the years under the spotlight, but also devoted many lines to a name that stunned the world, Johnny Carson. People had long thought they were close friends, bonded on television for decades. But the truth Rickles revealed was completely different. Why did Rickles choose to speak out only at the end of his life? Was it to free himself or to make the audience look at Carson with different eyes? In his final diaries, Don Rickles often repeated that what he couldn't stand about Johnny Carson was the pretense. On The Tonight Show, Johnny always appeared as a refined gentleman, making just enough jokes about marriage so that the audience believed he was the model of a faithful husband. Yet Rickles insisted this was nothing more than a shallow disguise. Behind the camera, Carson lived in jealousy, unfaithfulness, and late-night escapades few dared to tell. One of the most shocking incidents Rickles recorded took place in 1970 when Carson was married to his second wife, Joanne Copeland. Became obsessed with the idea that Joanne was involved with Frank Goffard, the former football star. The jealousy left him sleepless, even driving him to hire detectives. Not stopping there, Carson dragged his trusted lawyer, Henry Bushkin, into a strange mission, breaking into an apartment he believed Joanne was using for a secret affair. That night in Beverly Hills, the hallway lights reflected on the silent carpet. When the apartment door opened, Carson charged in like a hunter. He yanked open drawers, tossed sheets aside, and spilled suitcases onto the floor. Bushkin later recalled trembling as he picked up a woman's garment, still carrying the scent of perfume. Then saw photos of Joanne smiling next to Frank. On the dressing table lay a man's watch that clearly wasn't Carson's. At that moment, Johnny froze, face pale, then burst into a dry laugh. "Here it is, the proof I needed," Rickles commented. That moment was more terrifying than any outburst. Johnny didn't scream. He was cold, like someone peeling away a dirty truth. After this, the marriage with Joanne ended bitterly. But what's striking is that Johnny's later breakups weren't much better. He married 4 times, all ending in disappointment. His first wife, Jody Walcott, lived with him from 1948 to 1963 and bore him 3 sons. But Jad often accused Carson of straying during business trips, even spending nights in bars with other women. Rickles recalled Johnny once bluntly admitting, "I can't stay with just one person." Showbiz doesn't allow that. His second wife, Joanne Copeland, was at the center of the notorious apartment raid. When they divorced in 1972, Joanne received a huge settlement that filled newspaper headlines. But Rickles argued the greatest loss wasn't money, it was dignity. Carson had turned the marriage into an investigation, then exposed it with bitterness. Less than a year later, Carson married Joanna Holland, and their marriage lasted from 1972 to 1985. At first, they were seen as Hollywood's power couple, but Joanna shocked the public by filing for divorce during Christmas. According to Rickles, it was because Johnny gave Joanna cold nights and gave others warm ones. Rumors of his late-night absences and outside relationships only made the split more scandalous. By 1987, Johnny married Alexis Moss. Many hoped this would finally be his safe harbor. Yet, even during their Malibu honeymoon, his true nature appeared. One evening, Alexis casually joked about Johnny being too busy with work. That alone made him slam his glass on the table and say, in a harsh tone, "We've only been married 3 weeks. If you dare say that again, this marriage won't last another 3. Rickles wrote in his diary. Alexis never strayed, but she lived in fear because Johnny always doubted, always ready to punish with cold silence. Worse still, throughout the 1970s and 1980s, rumors of Johnny's nightlife spread across Hollywood. Many saw him in West Hollywood clubs drinking until dawn, surrounded by unfamiliar young women. Tabloids like the National Enquirer repeatedly printed photos of Carson with women in Las Vegas right after his shows. Rickles wrote, "The audience saw him hugging his wife on TV. I knew he had just bargained with a girl on Sunset Boulevard." All of this led Rickles to conclude bitterly. Johnny poured his whole heart into The Tonight Show, but for marriage, he only paid with 4 divorce papers and weary nights. The public praised him as a perfect gentleman, but in truth, he lived on jealousy, infidelity, and late-night escapades the public never saw. But broken relationships were only half the story. Within his own family, Johnny Carson left wounds far deeper and colder. Rickles once wrote that to understand why Johnny was so cold, one only needed to look at his relationship with his mother. From childhood, Johnny lived in a home almost devoid of affection. His mother, Ruth, was, in Rickles' words, a woman so tough, she seemed cruel. Johnny often nicknamed her Lady Macbeth. He grew up under constant criticism, never praise. Even after becoming a television star, Ruth didn't show pride, but mocked him as just a clown who could talk. This explained why in 1985, when Ruth passed away in Nebraska, Johnny chose not to attend the funeral. While family gathered, he stayed in Los Angeles, recording The Tonight Show as if nothing had happened. When a colleague asked if he would return home, Carson shrugged and coldly said, "The Wicked Witch is dead." Rickles wrote, "Everyone was stunned. He had severed all emotion with the very person who gave him life." That coldness extended to his children. Johnny had 3 sons with his first wife, Jody, Christopher, Corey, and Richard. After the divorce, he rarely kept close ties. On birthdays, he sometimes just mailed a check instead of showing up. People whispered. He often said, "Kids only tire me out. I don't have time for them." Christopher was rarely seen with him. Corey once complained in an interview that he grew up without a real father around. The biggest blow came in 1991 when Richard, second son, died in a car accident on the California coast. Johnny didn't attend the funeral. The public explanation was that his presence would turn it into a media event. But Rickles wrote that his absence only deepened the family's icy distance. The harshest treatment, however, was reserved for Rick, his youngest son, with Jody, who struggled with mental health. Rickles described one evening in 1987 at the 25th anniversary party of The Tonight Show in Los Angeles. The studio was glittering, filled with stars: Dean Martin, Bob Hope, Ed McMahon. The mood was festive until Carson, after a few whiskeys, turned to his son Rick and raised his voice. In front of hundreds of guests, Carson pointed at his son and shouted like scolding a stranger, "You've been nothing but a burden my whole life. Always a nuisance." The room froze in silence. Rickles wrote, "It was one of the moments when the king of television dropped his mask, showing himself as a man empty of family warmth." When Rick was hospitalized, Carson rarely visited. A nurse whispered to the press that Johnny only called briefly, then disappeared for months. One time, while Rick was still in the hospital, Carson was seen playing tennis at the Beverly Hills Club. Rickles remarked he treated family collapse as an inconvenience while keeping his television image mattered most. These details, Rickles believed, showed Carson lived his entire life in distance. He didn't know how to bond, didn't want to mend, and when he couldn't control loved ones, he chose withdrawal. That's why he turned his back on his mother, distanced from his children, and stayed cold, even in great losses. And from that coldness, Johnny carried it onto the stage where jokes that seemed harmless often turned into scandals that rocked Hollywood. Rickles recalled that during Carson's years on The Tonight Show, many jokes became real wounds for others. The audience clapped, but backstage the consequences were heavier. One example was in the mid-1970s when Carson welcomed Harrison Page, a black actor, as a guest. During their talk, Carson suddenly mimicked a black accent for laughs. The audience roared, but Page sat stiffly, hiding his discomfort. After the show, he left quietly, skipping the usual photos. This story later resurfaced as proof of humor turning into hurt. In 1984, Carson stirred controversy again when he welcomed Vanessa Williams, the first black Miss America. Instead of congratulating her, he joked she won only because there was a black judge on the panel. The audience laughed, but Vanessa forced a smile. Years later, she admitted the remark hurt as it dismissed her effort and talent. The incident spread and the press cited as one of Carson's least admirable moments on TV. Beyond race, Carson often mocked appearances. Actor Raymond Burr, famed for Perry Mason, was a target. Carson repeatedly joked about his weight, calling him a moving hill on live TV. Burr endured at first, but after being mocked in the opening once more, he walked out and refused to return to the show for years. He only came back twice under NBC pressure, but his relationship with Carson never healed. The most intense case was with singer Wayne Newton. Carson repeatedly hinted at Newton's masculinity. At first, Newton stayed silent, but as the jokes mounted, he grew furious. Reportedly, he once confronted Carson backstage and demanded it stop. Later in interviews, Newton openly criticized Carson as harsh, vowing never to reconcile.